which is found in many, many parts of the world. In fact, there's a joke among the Sindhi community members that you scratch any part of the world, you are bound to find a member of the Sindhi community. So let's move on to why I am focusing on aligning strategies. Professor Kavita just mentioned the aims of the NGO, and one of them was documentation. One is revitalisation. I'm not going to focus on documentation because there are a lot of works in Sindhi literature, Sindhi language. These are all in hard copies, in soft copies. They are found easily. So there is no fear of the lack of documentation. But what is a bigger problem, in my view, is the fact that the community members in many parts of the world have actually, the younger community members have stopped using their mother tongue, their heritage language. So in this paper, I would like to focus on the work of language activists. How can language activists encourage members of a speech community who are not using their heritage language to do so? So my focus, as I said, is the diasporic Sindhi Hindu community, which lost its homeland way back in 1947 with the partitioning of the Indian subcontinent. And so at that time, when the Indian subcontinent was split into two, with Pakistan forming one part of the continent and India the other, 800,000, roughly 800,000 Sindhi Hindus had to flee their one-time homeland Sindh. And today, they have no country, no homeland of their own, and lived in what Ben Anderson called imaginary communities, not only in India, but in many parts of the world. They are found mainly in India, in different parts of India, but they are found in Malaysia, in Singapore, there's a big community, in Hong Kong, there is a big community, as there is in London, St. Martin in the Canary Islands, Malta, Spain, and numerous other countries. Documented research in the Sindhi community in many of these countries show that there has been a shift away from the dominant use of their ethnic language by members of the Sindhi Hindu speech community. Please note, I'm focusing on the Sindhi Hindu speech community because one new development that has occurred over recent years is Sindhi Christian speech community. And of course, in Sindh, in Pakistan, you also have a big majority of Sindhi Muslim speech communities and a very small minority community of All right, let's move to the next slide, Ajay, please. So studies of the Sindhi community in India, some 30 years after partition, found that the community in India had shifted away from habitual use of the Sindhi language in India. I'm sorry you hear the fireworks in the background because Deepavali has started here. So the community had shifted away from the habitual use of the Sindhi language in India, and this was a huge research done by Daswani and Parchani in 1978. And Daswani did another study in 1989. But in fact, as early as 1963, Kupchandani, in his doctorate thesis for the University of Pennsylvania, discussed the shift of the Indian Sindhi language to Hindi. More recent studies in different parts of the world of the Sindhi community show a trend to language shift. The Sindhis in Metro Manila, Philippines, in a study by Dewan in 1997, had not only shifted away from Sindhi as their dominant language, but had also converted to Christianity. I did a study in 1996 on the Sindhis in Malaysia. That was a huge study focusing on the community, the entire community. Then I did a smaller study on some families in Singapore and in London. And we find similar shift occurring among the younger members of the community. A comparative study of the Sindhi and Punjabi communities in Hong Kong by Dick Tremani and Locke in 2003 also shows a shift. But that shift among the Sindhis is more extensive and more rapid as compared to the Hong Kong Punjabi community. So the Sindhi community moved faster away from their language as compared to the Punjabi community in Hong Kong. In Jakarta, Tapan in 2002 also shows there has been a shift. Ajay, next slide. Many of these studies focused on language shift, but a recent study by Iyengar in 2013 focused on perceptions of young Sindhis in the city of Pune, India, on the value and usefulness of the Sindhi language. Such an emphasis on the perceptions and attitudes of community members towards their heritage language provide vital knowledge which may help language activists to focus on appropriate ways to encourage community members to use their language. As far back as 2003, Garrett et al. Had stated that attitudes provide a major motivation to either support or reject a language. In a more recent study in 2014, Iyengar suggests that perhaps the use of two scripts, the Devanagari script and the Perso-Arabic script, should be replaced by a Roman script to facilitate literary acquisition. This, he believes, would promote a more positive attitude towards the Sindhi language and consequently its use. Let me just say something about the Devanagari script and the other script. There are two scripts. In fact, there are three. Many of the older Sindhi members in Malaysia even know the Gurumukhi script. But those who came from Pakistan, from Sindh, way back in the 1940s, 50s, they knew the Perso-Arabic script. Younger members in India learning Sindhi, the few who go to schools which teach Sindhi, they learn the other script in India, the Devanagari script. So Iyengar, speaking from this background, talks about two scripts. But I find that many Sindhis are now using the Romanized English script to say some things when they write, especially in the comments columns or in WhatsApp. So we move on. This shift away from the habitual use of its ethnic or heritage language among community members in different countries has concerned members of the Sindhi community. Leading members of the community like Dada Waswani, a spiritual leader of the Sindhi Hindu community, often made appeals to the community to use their mother tongue. However, in his desire to spread his message, he himself sometimes used both Sindhi and English to accommodate younger community members. When I was in London, I listened to some of his recordings, and the recordings, when there were young listeners, the recordings were in English of the same discourse. But when there were older community members listening to the speech, then it would be in Sindhi. So Dada Waswani, as a leader, as a guru of the community, a spiritual guru, he actually accommodated to community members because his intent was to spread his messages. We move on then. I feel that leaders of a community must encourage the use of the ethnic language and you can say you should use your language. There are many Sindhi associations in different parts of the world. And when I look at their vision and mission statement, often the vision and mission statement, one of the aims is to encourage members of the community to use the language. But when they meet, I've been at association meetings in London, and also I have a friend in Vancouver, and she just wrote her presidential speech, and it's in English. And also in Malaysia, when we meet at official like AGMs or association meetings, the discourse is in English. So it's important that leaders of a community must ensure that this desire to ask people to speak the language should be reflected in their own language use. Recently I noted in a Facebook recording that the president of the Sindhi Association, who is currently the president of all the global Sindhi associations, in a webinar by the Alliance of Global Sindhi Associations in the Making of a Sindhi Nation, responded to a query put to him in Sindhi by the MC. He responded in English, and whenever there was a question, he would respond in English. So this was watched by Sindhis in different parts of India and Sindhis in 70 other nations. Role models like such international presidents must encourage the use of Sindhi by using the ethnic language in such public discourse. Today, there are several language activists. In fact, there are many Sindhi language activists who, due to COVID-19, have had the time and opportunity to create a number of online platforms with the discourse taking place in Sindhi. I will describe and examine the extensive work of these activists and the many strategies used to encourage community members to use the ethnic language. I will also attempt to evaluate the success of these strategies. Ajay, next slide. So let me move on to discuss these online platforms. During this time, a popular means of encouraging people to use their language and make them feel that they are united and have a rich culture and a rich identity is by using electronic media, because the community is not in one place. They're scattered, they're global, they're diasporic community and all over the world. So social media and such electronic devices to spread messages are very useful. As I said, these platforms have increased tremendously in recent months, and some of them are shown daily through Facebook. There are different websites where telefilms, TV shows, magazines, folk music, dances, even proverbs, literature is used to all in Sindhi to restore the image of the language. So let me move on to each of these platforms to see what their strategy is, what is their focus. Their idea is to encourage people to use the language, but what different platforms seem to be doing it differently. So the one recent platform is Sindhi Anmol Ratan. Anmol means precious, and their idea is to try and bind the global Sindhi community together and to encourage the use of Sindhi. Sorry, I'm getting interruptions. To try and bind the global Sindhi community together and to encourage the use of Sindhi by focusing on interviews with prosperous and successful Sindhi men and women in different parts of the world. Not only from India, but from different parts of the world. So we have had interviews, and I've been watching these over the last 2 weeks to see how is this platform functioning? What is their objective? And in this platform, there are 5 or 6 permanent leading members from different cities of India, like Pune, Bombay and one from Chile. There's an actor from Chile, all ethnically Sindhi. They often host guests from Spain and from different parts of the world, encouraging them to talk about their life journeys. So normally these elderly gentlemen or women will talk about what happened with the partitioning, how they came to India, and from India, how they moved to different places, how they obeyed their parents, and the ideas of their parents are reflected in the way they live. So today, the young Sindhis learn of the perils, obstacles, and opportunities on the roads taken by the first generation who had to flee from Sindh with just their clothes on their back, and how they thrived in new environments, became rich and prosperous, and they did a lot of generous charitable works. And so their value system is also discussed. So in these interviews, we hear about the solid value systems of the Sindhis, like filial loyalty, generosity, their rich and ancient culture and traditions. So the hidden, unstated motive is be proud to be a Sindhi. Be proud, and to be a Sindhi, learn to speak the Sindhi language, use the Sindhi language so that fellow Sindhis recognize you as members of the community. The hidden agenda there is, although we are scattered all around the world, we are members of one community. So that is the indirect way of making people feel proud of being Sindhi, of their identity as Sindhis. And one way to know your identity is through your language. That was the aim of that platform. I now move on to another platform which seems to use another strategy. This is an older platform. It is, you can see it there, www.learnsindhi.com. And it is a website created to teach the Sindhi language from basic to advanced level. This website has online lectures as well as a complete CD course, which contains the material from basic sounds and letters to an advanced level. The site, however, uses Arabic Sindhi and sometimes Roman scripts to teach Sindhi. Asha Chand, a very strong language activist for the Sindhi language, introduces the sites for teaching and learning the Sindhi language, starting from basic sounds and letters to the advanced level sentence structure. According to her, the Sindhi language in India and in other parts of the world is at risk, as I mentioned, through documented research. And she's worried about the loss of Sindhi as a mother tongue. So she actually travels to different parts of India, to different schools in India, to encourage some schools to have Sindhi as a subject. She was in the Middle East for many years, and was also, when she was there, she was encouraging people to use the language through dancing, singing competitions and concerts and so on. And basically she travels. She even came to Malaysia to meet up with me to discuss her strategy for encouraging the use of the Sindhi language. So the focus here of this platform is language, literature, and culture. Now, I watched a video clip where she had a number of women, and they are all speaking in Sindhi, and they are saying that they should speak Sindhi in their homes. The implication of this is that women, even the home domain, are not using Sindhi. So she's encouraging them through this video clip, which is shown to many people all over the world, that, you know, Sindhi parents must themselves, maybe they themselves don't have the language, they must learn and use Sindhi in their homes. First they have to learn it, then they have to use it in their homes and in their daily lives. Asha Chand also provides weekly a couple of proverbs, providing their meaning and examples in sentences. Such proverbs, for example, like, and I'm translating from Sindhi to English, like scold your daughter so that your daughter-in-law will get the message, signify diplomacy, and a certain value system, I guess, not to be so direct with the daughter-in-law. So proverbs codify the culture of the language and tell stories. I myself have been watching these proverbs and learning a lot from these proverbs. It's shown weekly. So focus on mothers, focus on use of language, focus on learning of the language. Very different from the other first website, which I discussed. Now we move on to a third website. This is www.sindhisangat.com. The literal meaning of the phrase Sindhi Sangat is Sindhi friendship, Sindhi brotherhood, or Sindhi people. This website produces many things related to the Sindhi language, literature, and culture, and has various means of encouraging the community to use the language. For example, Sindhi families are informed of an annual competition which has been run for the last 5 or 6 years to promote the Sindhi language by focusing on young children and indirectly their parents. Children were given 2 or 3 nursery rhymes, asked to prepare one of them, especially during this COVID regime right now, and they had to put it on a video and send this video clipping or to the conference organizers, to the competition organization. And this was annual international nursery rhymes, which offered attractive prizes like tablets. So parents were involved as they had to help their children to memorize a particular poem, and they had to be involved in the dressing of the child and also in the shooting of the videos. The organizers promised that a video of all the children would be put on YouTube and that the mothers would be given credit. So this is psychologically encouraging the mothers to be involved in using Sindhi with their children. One of the methods used by Sindhi Sangat is to revitalize Sindhi is the read and write section in the site. Now please note this section is further classified into Sindhi articles, English articles, learn Sindhi, stories, folk literature, and music in Sindhi and sometimes in English, Sindhi value systems, Sindhi books, and Sindhi short stories. These are attempts targeted at children, like nursery stories, stories for children, but there are also higher level stories for intermediate and advanced level learners. But you know, some of these stories are also in English. So it appears that the knowledge of the rich Sindhi culture at times must be transmitted even if it is in English. Sindhi Sangat also produces Sindhi telefilms, half-an-hour Sindhi telefilms every Monday from, I think, 10 o'clock at night or something like that. And also they show people singing Sindhi songs, some people dancing, folk music, recitation of Sindhi poetry, and so on. So basically, the idea is to encourage people to use a rich language, and the rich language is shown through poetry, music, songs, and sometimes people are encouraged to watch the movies too. Okay, so we have video clips and audio clips also to teach Sindhi proverbs, and they're not, the clips are very short. Sometimes at any one time you get only 3 proverbs and then the explanation of the proverb and the proverb in a sentence. Next site I want to discuss is called Sindhi Sati. Sindhi Sati is a website to also revitalize the language. And again, Sati means a friend, a comrade, a companion, a brother. And the idea is to a platform for Sindhis wherever they live, whichever corner of the world they live in, together and to unite on one platform so that they can preserve their language, their culture. On Sindhi Sati, a few entries. Now I noticed that a few entries on the platform itself, like wish you a happy new year and a Sindhi video contest for youngsters, are written not only in Sindhi, in the Arabic script, but also in English, in Romanized English. So the use of English is used as well as apparently because it's felt that the wider audience appear to be English proficient. Even the comments, if in Sindhi, are often comments from people watching these clips are often written in Romanized English, seldom in the Arabic or Devanagari script. And many comments, in short, from the viewing audience are often in English. Then we have another clip, Sindhi heritage. The Bhagavad Gita is explained in Sindhi in this website. As I said, many of the Sindhis have become Christians, and so it was felt necessary not only to focus on Sindhi Hindus by using this Hindu text in Sindhi. We move on to the next one, Ajay. We have, I keep telling you about the many websites, but I want to go on to discuss what they are doing. So we have Sindhi Gulab. It's another site aimed at revitalizing the Sindhi language, and it's one of the earliest internet magazines, having been started in 2001 in the service of Sindhiat. It has 5 sections focusing on language, literature, culture, and many others like Sindhi media, the religion of the Sindhi Hindus. And you have subsections, but it is in Arabic Sindhi. And Arabic Sindhi, as I mentioned to you, was used by the first generation who moved out of Sindh. People like me, the second generation, we don't know Arabic Sindhi. And we don't even know Devanagari Sindhi because we haven't been to schools where Devanagari Sindhi was taught. In Malaysia, there are no such schools. So, so the focus appears to be by these language activists in all these websites. So far, the written script that they talk about is Arabic Sindhi. But I notice now some listeners and viewers are responding in Devanagari Sindhi, and these are mainly from India. So there are 10 patrons of this electronic web magazine. I'm not going to mention the names, they're there on the PowerPoint, but you know, they're not only patrons of the electronic magazine, but they are leading Sindhi language activists who are trying their best to maintain and revitalize the Sindhi language. And they can be seen sometimes physically at different workshops and seminars. I mean, this is before COVID, when we all have had a lockdown. But before that, they used to go to different places and talk to different audiences about the use, talk to them in Sindhi about the culture, the literature, and so on. Ajay, next one, please. I'm coming to the final ends of the websites. There's Sindhi Wood, which is a channel on Facebook platform presenting comedies in Sindhi. And then we have Sindhi Kitchen, which shows how Sindhi food is made. Then there's Seva Sangam, which is a recent innovation where you have telefilms via Facebook every Monday. And today we find many YouTube programs with Sindhi songs and dances and stories. So I've given you, let's move on. I've given you the whole list of platforms that I have seen, but daily when I go on Facebook, I find new platforms coming up. So let's evaluate these programs. Speech communities shift to other languages for a number of reasons, as you know. And these reasons can be both internal reasons and external reasons. External reasons like war, genocide, natural disasters. Sometimes language internal, like educational policies, which can result in language shift. Also, the language in the countries that they have moved to may indicate socioeconomic status. They may want to adopt or adapt to another language due to nationality reasons. For example, in Malaysia, speaking the Malay language is an integral part of the cultural identity of being a Malaysian. Or Tagalog, knowledge of Tagalog in the Philippines, also of English. So in Malaysia, it's Malay and English. In Philippines, it's Tagalog and English. The national language and international language. So there are therefore political, educational, and socio-economic motivations for language shift. In short, both internal and external factors within a speech community can cause language shift. Now, language attitude plays a vital role for the maintenance and shift of any language. The attitude and use or non-use of a heritage language can be determined by many factors, including if the community is a minority community living in a multilingual setting. In Malaysia, for example, we have 700 over people, Sindhis, in a country with a population of 35 million. So we are a minority of a minority. And minority communities, especially minority of minorities, normally shift to languages which have social capital. So the international language, English, and the national language in Malaysia, for instance, have social capital, will help them get jobs. Malay will help them get jobs in government departments, English in the private sector. So these languages, I remember years ago talking to one grandparent, and he said, I want my grandchildren to learn English and Malay. Sindhi will be of no use to them. What will they do with Sindhi in Malaysia? So if the community itself does not see any social capital in its heritage language, if the language policy in the country they are living in requires the medium of instruction in school and universities to be the national language, these are important factors, and there are many other factors which cause intragenerational or intergenerational language shift. The former is a shift within the same generation, and the latter involves a shift between one generation and the other. Let me provide you with an example. The first generation in Malaysia, for example, who came out and started living and working in Malaysia, many of them were merchants and they were catering to the British. And so for them, English was important. For the men having these textile shops, English was important. When they came home, they spoke to their wives in Sindhi, but the wives having domestic helpers had to learn Malay to speak a pidginized variety of Malay with their maids. The children went to schools at a time when English was the medium of instruction. Today, Malay is the medium of instruction in government schools, but in private schools, it's still English. So even the first generation, the men were already starting to use English at their workplace with customers, with their salesperson who happened to be Sindhis, then they would use Sindhi. But over time, they started having Chinese and Indian workers. So they had to use either English or Malay with these salespeople. So when there is no intergenerational transmission of the ethnic or heritage language, there will be language loss. If within the first generation already they're starting to shift, and then the second generation is going to schools where English is the medium of instruction, and they come back and their father tends to move to English, then there's a chance that younger children will start using more English. So if parents do not use the ethnic language in the home domain with their children, there will be language shift. If a language can be lost in some functions and some domains, there is a possibility of salvaging it or reviving it. So let me again give you an example. In my home, for example, although my father and mother spoke to each other in Sindhi, oftentimes when they spoke to us in English. But our prayers, my mother used to say Om Jai Jagati always in Sindhi, and we heard this twice a day. So in the religious domain, we still had Sindhi, but in social chit-chat, we would shift to English. So as a language activist, you must know where is the language being lost, in which generation, in which domain. So before rushing into activities to revitalize or restore a language, it is vital to determine reasons for the shift, extent of the shift, and only then extent of the shift, meaning which domain has it gone away? Which generation has it gone away from? Why have they shifted? Is it attitudinal, or is it because of language policy of the countries they have moved to? So once we know this, then we think carefully of and activate appropriate strategies to revitalize the language. In short, what is being recommended is a psychosocial dimension to the study of language shift and language use. Determine the reason and determine the state of the shift. If the shift has already taken place in the first generation of migrants, and if the second generation learned another language in school, and hear yet another language in the home domain, there has occurred not only intergenerational shift, but intragenerational shift. So within the first generation, and then between the generations, where the ethnic language is not transmitted from one generation to another. So the language activists must be aware of these things and then think of appropriate strategies, where to zero in, who to zero into, and how to restore the language use. I prefer to use the word restore rather than revitalize, because it's not dead. It's people are just not using it, but the language is there, it's documented. Some people still know it. So ways to encourage such a community to use their language. If the shift has started in the home domain, activists must be able to change the negative attitude of the speech community to its own language. Remember the grandfather who said to me, what's the use? What's the use of the language? What utility does the language have? So we have to show them the utility of having a language. And that is what one of the first platforms that I talked about did. They said the utility is unity. The utility is identity. Wherever you go, if you speak Sindhi, people will know you're a Sindhi and they will want to help you. And also, Sindhis are charitable. Sindhis are generous. So how do you show your identity as Sindhi? By knowing the language. So it works through psychological means. Those are the focus. Now, in this case, if in the home domain the language is being lost, then the focus has to be the parents, both of them. Although the focus has often been the mother, it could be both mother and father, and even grandmother and grandfather. In a study I did in Malaysia, I remember the grandmother who was shifting to Pidgin Malay to speak to her grandson. And I was surprised because it was the accommodation was being done by the elderly rather than by the younger. So we have to focus on parents and parental agency. And yesterday we heard Anik Nandi talking about importance of parental agency. Parents can be encouraged to be language activists in the home domain and influence their children's language choices. Parents have a vital role in prestige planning of a minority language and can influence language ideology within the family domain. But first, the parents must know the language and also use the language. If they don't, so in fact, Asha Chand has actually started a learning platform for adults to learn the language, not only for children. So there is no lack of books or dictionaries in the Sindhi language. There is no need to document the language, but what needs to be done is to encourage members of the community to use the language, especially in the home domain and with their children and perhaps even grandchildren. But to do that, community members must be given solid and understandable reasons why they should use their language. As the first platform, the Anmol Rotan platform said, so that you are recognized, your identity as a Sindhi is known wherever you go. So Asha Chand is motivating young children by organizing songs, dances, poetry, story competitions, and providing attractive gift tokens. Using social media, she's encouraging mothers to use the language in the home domain with their children. However, encouraging people to move away from established language habits does not mean that it will result in immediate automatic change. First, you have to convince them, then parents must learn the language. If they don't know the language, then they must, I'll give you my own example. My eldest son, who just had a baby, actually said to me, speak to your grandchild in Sindhi. And because I'm so used to speaking in English, both at the workplace and even with my husband, who is not a Sindhi, I found it difficult to speak to my grandchild in Sindhi, although my son had given me full permission to speak Sindhi. So Asha Chand is also, moving back to Asha Chand, the language activist, she's also encouraging principals in schools in certain parts of India to have Sindhi as a subject in the formative years of a child's education. However, if these few children, because the Sindhis are scattered in different parts of India, except for a couple of places where there's a large majority of them, if these minority language students hear Hindi and other regional languages, both in the home and outside the home domains, then the Sindhi language merely becomes a class-learned language. And if it's a class language, it's like, you know, you learn French or you learn Latin, but you don't use it much. You know, my other grandchildren are learning French and Latin, but it's only a class-based language. It's not a language you use elsewhere. So, so we have seen so many activists, so many interested parties in the Sindhi community who through their respective webinars want to capture the interests of the younger community members by presenting them with successful businessmen, actors, singers, film producers, comedians who all speaking in Sindhi hope to encourage receptive knowledge of the language. Sindhi food, how to cook Sindhi foods, and also there's Sindhi movies. They're all attractive catalysts to encourage understanding of the language and listening to the language. Moving on to the discussion. Language activists are doing their best to restore the use of Sindhi among Sindhi Hindus. The work of the activists must start with the community and attract the community to the use of the language by providing compelling reasons why the heritage language should be used. Communities which have moved away from use of the heritage language in the home domain, which, as Fishman said many, many years ago, is the last bastion of language maintenance. The new language choices are so deeply ingrained that the community must be encouraged to remain bi or multilingual. And you know, it's I heard one of these language activists saying, we're not saying that you shouldn't use other language. Remain multilingual. Know many languages. You have to, because you're living in communities where there are very few of you and the majority language is the language you have to use to survive. So be multilingual. But there are many cognitive advantages of knowing your mother tongue. There are many positive reasons for using heritage language. So being multilingual doesn't mean you kill or don't use your mother tongue. So as we have seen, one way which is being used by these language activists through these websites is to make the community, wherever they may be residing, to feel proud that they are Sindhis, who have a rich heritage of values, including that of being charitable, generous, have a rich culture, including language, songs, dances, and a rich religious tradition. And wherever they go, they will be recognized by their language and helped by fellow Sindhis. Okay, next one. We're coming towards the end. Excuse me. Can we go on to the next slide? Some of the language activists also appear to have reduced their expectations. Now, this is something new. There appears, I was watching many of these people on these platforms, these language activists, there appears to be a lowering of expectations for the language restoration program. Some members of the community who are trying to encourage members of the speech community to use the language have argued that perhaps speaking the language is more important than focusing on written literacy, as the Sindhi script, as I told you before, can be written in Devanagari, Perso-Arabic script, or even the Roman script. So consequently, community leaders are being realistic and dropping their expectations of a return to the written language. They say it's okay so long as they can speak, so long as they can understand. And when literacy goes, written literacy goes, you actually lose your culture, your literature, unless all that literature is translated in Romanized English with Sindhi as the base. Other activists appear to be content with a receptive knowledge of the mother tongue. I heard one language activist actually saying, it's okay, he understands. In short, language activists appear to be lowering their expectations of how much and what type of restoration of the mother tongue they are content with. Next slide, please. Ajay? Yes, sir. So, language restoration activists must try and involve many members of the speech community, perhaps even lowering expectations of the extent to which they want to restore the language. Spoken literacy, written literacy, productive or receptive knowledge of the language. The activists must determine not only the reasons for the shift, but find ways to attract people back to the habitual use of their heritage language. The extent of the shift must be determined. In which domain is the language lost? Knowing the specific domain will help the activists to focus on appropriate strategies for that domain. Next slide, Ajay. In short, in a global community which has no homeland, which sees social capital in other languages in their new settings, a more viable approach to restoring or encouraging Sindhis to use their language in the home domain or even within ethnic encounters is to use persuasive discourse strategies to encourage and persuade specific members of the speech community to see value in using their language and telling them it's okay, you can have a multilingual repertoire, but use your mother tongue too. Members of the speech community, wherever they are, must be made to understand that multilingualism does not automatically result or require a complete shift away from the mother tongue. A classic example of what I consider a successful restoration or revitalization program is one that is conducted by activist Torwali and his co-activists in the Swat Valley in Pakistan. They focus on the young. That's where we should be focusing too, on the young, on their parents, and also on the elderly, like the grandparents, to use their languages. And they also have storytellers going around telling fables. And we, through our platforms, we have seen the storytellers through their movies telling fables in Sindhi. In conclusion, members of a speech community have different reasons why they have moved away from habitual use or even knowledge of their heritage language. Language activists must be aware of this. They must know about this. It is hoped that activists determine reasons and extent of a shift and work together with community members and provide them with logical and even emotional reasons for use of their mother tongue, especially in the home domain. In short, to excite and interest them by using a number of strategies for using and maintaining the heritage language. Some of the Sindhi activists discussed in this paper appear to be focusing on instilling pride in being a Sindhi and creating community solidarity. And others appear to be focusing on knowledge of the written script by providing apps for the written script and by providing competitions for children with attractive prizes. I have a list of references if you would like to look at them. The PowerPoint is with the organizers and you can look at these references. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Maya David. It was an interesting talk. We have thoroughly enjoyed your talk. You have, you have, pointed to, you have tried to capture the situation with Sindhi as a diaspora and what are the things you need in order to restore and also revitalize the language among the native speakers of Sindhi. So now the paper is open for discussion. I invite the participants to come with your comments and questions. You may write in the chat box, and also or else you may just unmute yourself and address the speaker with your comments and questions.
Sorry for the interruption. Ajay, stop sharing the screen, please, so that. Thank you.